You didn't lose your mind. You didn't imagine the shift, and you're not too sensitive for feeling shattered by someone who once felt safe. If you're listening to this, it's because a woman hurt you in a way that didn't leave bruises, but left questions. Late nights replaying conversations. That quiet moment when you realized her words didn't match her actions. The slow, painful understanding that you were investing in someone who was slowly withdrawing from you. Welcome to Female Code Unlocked, the place where emotions aren't mocked, patterns aren't ignored, and the unspoken truths finally get a voice. If this kind of deep psychological clarity speaks to you, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear might save you years of confusion. Let's talk quietly for a moment. Not like a coach, not like a guru, but like someone who sees what's really happening beneath the surface. When a woman hurts you, the pain isn't just about what she did. It's about what it made you question about yourself. You start wondering if you weren't enough, if you said too much, or not enough, if you should have been colder, stronger, less available. And that's the real damage. Not the loss of her, but the erosion of your self-trust. Here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Emotional hurt often comes from imbalance, not evil. Sometimes she didn't wake up wanting to hurt you. Sometimes she simply followed her emotions, and you were standing in the path of them. And that's where dark psychology quietly enters the room. Human beings are drawn to what feels powerful, not what feels predictable. Attention given freely is rarely valued. Presence without boundaries becomes invisible. Think about it. The moment you became more invested than she was, the dynamic shifted. Not because you cared, but because the polarity disappeared. And when polarity disappears, respect often fades with it. You might recognize the pattern. She pulled away, and you leaned in. She became distant, and you tried harder. You gave clarity. She gave confusion. That confusion wasn't accidental. Uncertainty keeps people emotionally hooked. When answers are withheld, the mind fills the gaps with hope. And hope is dangerous when it's fed by silence. But listen carefully. This is important. Handling a woman who hurts you doesn't mean confronting her. It doesn't mean explaining yourself again. It doesn't mean proving your worth or demanding closure. That's what your emotions want. That's not what your power needs. The strongest move in emotional warfare is not reaction. It's regulation. When you react from pain, you hand over control. When you stay grounded, you force reality to reveal itself. A woman who hurts you expects one thing: emotional access, anger, pleading, long messages, late-night confessions. What she doesn't expect is your calm. Calm exposes intentions. Calm removes leverage. Calm makes people confront their own behavior without you saying a word. Right now, you're standing at a psychological crossroads. One path leads to obsession, replaying her actions, analyzing her tone, waiting for clarity that may never come. The other path leads to self-respect, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself but changes everything. And here's the part most men miss. The moment you stop chasing understanding from someone who hurt you, you begin understanding yourself. That's where the real shift begins. There's a strange silence that appears when you finally stop reaching out. No texts, no explanations, no emotional breadcrumbs left behind. At first, that silence feels unbearable, like you're losing control, but in reality, you're reclaiming it. Because here's the psychological truth most people never tell you. Distance doesn't weaken emotional bonds. It reveals their true shape. If she only felt close to you when you were available, accommodating, emotionally open, then what she loved wasn't you. It was the access. When that access disappears, something interesting happens. Either respect replaces entitlement, or indifference reveals itself completely. And both outcomes give you clarity. You see, when a woman hurts you and you keep explaining how much it affected you, you unintentionally teach her that your emotional stability depends on her behavior. That's not connection. That's leverage. And leverage is intoxicating to the wrong kind of personality. Some people don't hurt you because they're cruel. They hurt you because they're unregulated, unsure, or addicted to emotional validation. And when they feel powerful, they feel alive. But power fades the moment you stop feeding it. This is where most men make the fatal mistake. They think handling means confronting, calling her out, demanding accountability. But confrontation only works when the other person values harmony more than control. If she valued harmony, she wouldn't have hurt you in the first place. So instead, you shift your energy inward, not in bitterness, but in discipline. You stop over-explaining. You stop performing emotional labor for someone who didn't protect your feelings. You stop rewarding mixed signals with unwavering loyalty. And suddenly, the dynamic flips. Not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer available to be used as an emotional cushion. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when she realizes she no longer has access to your inner world. No updates, no vulnerability on demand, no emotional reactions to provoke. That's when curiosity appears, sometimes guilt, sometimes regret. And this is crucial. You don't rush to meet it. You observe, because observation is power. It tells you whether her interest is rooted in respect or fear of losing control. If she reaches out with confusion instead of accountability, you stay calm. If she asks questions without taking responsibility, you stay grounded. If she tests whether you're still emotionally available, you stay centered. You don't punish. You don't plead. You don't chase closure. You let consistency speak louder than words. This isn't about manipulation. It's about alignment. A woman who is emotionally mature will meet your calm with reflection. A woman who relied on emotional dominance will meet it with frustration. And that distinction tells you everything you need to know. Here's the part that changes you permanently. When you stop internalizing how someone treated you, you stop shrinking yourself to be understood. You realize that not everyone deserves access to your depth, not everyone can handle your presence, and not every connection is meant to feel safe. Pain sharpens perception, if you let it. Instead of asking, "Why did she hurt me?" you begin asking, "Why did I tolerate it?" And that question doesn't shame you, it frees you, because once you answer it honestly, you never repeat the pattern again. You become quieter, not weaker, more selective, not colder, more self-contained, not closed off. And the next time a woman enters your life, she doesn't meet someone trying to prove value. She meets someone who already knows it. That's how you handle a woman who hurt you. Not with rage, not with silence meant to punish, but with presence so grounded that it no longer bends to disrespect. There's a moment you don't notice at first, but it changes you. It's when you stop waiting for her to become who you hoped she was. Not angrily, not bitterly, just quietly. You wake up one day and realize the emotional noise is gone. The constant urge to check your phone. The reflex to reread old messages. The mental courtroom where you kept defending her behavior against your own pain. And in that quiet, something uncomfortable shows up. Clarity. You finally see her as she is, not as the version you fell for, not as the potential you protected, but as the person who made choices knowing they would cost you emotionally. That's a hard truth to swallow, because it means the pain wasn't random. It was tolerated. And here's where real psychological strength is forged. You stop framing the story as "she hurt me," and start understanding it as "I stayed when my intuition warned me." This isn't self-blame. It's self-responsibility. Because responsibility is power. A woman who hurts you often senses something before you do. Your willingness to overextend. Your fear of losing connection. Your tendency to give the benefit of the doubt longer than it's earned. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you emotionally capable. But capability without boundaries becomes a liability. You see, some people don't respond to kindness with care. They respond with testing. They push. They pull back. They see how much inconsistency you'll accept before you protect yourself. And every time you stay silent about your discomfort, you teach them how to treat you. That's the part no one likes to admit. So when you finally pull your energy back, not dramatically, not to make a point, but because you genuinely refuse to abandon yourself again, something profound happens. You stop chasing emotional safety from people who thrive in emotional chaos. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You stop mistaking potential for commitment. And suddenly, the pain that once controlled you becomes information. Information about what you need, what you won't tolerate again, what kind of emotional environment you actually thrive in. This is where dark psychology flips into self-mastery, because the most dangerous person in any emotional dynamic isn't the one who hurts others. It's the one who no longer needs validation to feel whole. When you reach that place, your energy changes. You speak less, but with weight. You react slower, but with intention. You walk away sooner, without explanation. Not because you're cold, but because you've learned that access to you is a privilege, not a guarantee. And here's the final shift most people never experience. You stop wanting her to regret losing you. You stop fantasizing about her realizing your value too late, because your self-worth no longer needs an audience. If she comes back with accountability, consistency, and humility, you'll recognize it. If she comes back with confusion, nostalgia, or entitlement, you'll feel nothing. And that neutrality? That's freedom. The goal was never to win the emotional battle. The goal was to stop fighting yourself. When a woman hurts you, the lesson isn't to harden your heart. It's to sharpen your discernment. And once you do that, you don't just heal, you evolve. You become someone who can love deeply, without bleeding for it. There's a final layer to this lesson that most people never reach, because it requires letting go of the identity you built around the pain. For a while, being hurt gave you a story. It gave you something to analyze, to fix, to carry. It made you feel connected to something that once mattered. But growth asks a harder question. Who are you without the wound? When you stop defining yourself by what she did, you reclaim something essential: your direction. You're no longer moving away from her behavior. You're moving toward your standards. And standards change everything. You begin to notice how peace feels in your body, how consistency feels calming instead of boring, how clarity feels attractive in ways intensity never was. This is where many people get uncomfortable, because chaos can feel like chemistry when you're used to emotional spikes. But calm requires self-worth. And self-worth doesn't chase. It doesn't over-explain. It doesn't wait in emotional limbo hoping to be chosen. Self-worth chooses. That's the part that quietly rewires you. You no longer ask, how do I make her see my value? You ask, does this person add to my life or drain it? And the moment that question becomes automatic, you've already won, not against her, but against the version of you that used to abandon yourself for connection. Here's the dark psychological truth that most never understand. People who hurt others are often deeply afraid of emotional equality. They feel safe when they're slightly ahead, slightly needed, slightly in control. But when you stop needing, the dynamic collapses, not because you became cold, but because you became whole. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure conversations. You don't need to be understood by someone who chose not to understand you when it mattered. Your silence isn't punishment. It's graduation, and something subtle begins to happen in your life. You attract people who communicate directly, who don't test your limits for entertainment, who don't confuse emotional depth with emotional damage. Because you're no longer broadcasting tolerance for inconsistency. You're broadcasting discernment. And discernment is magnetic. The woman who hurt you? She becomes a reference point, not a destination, a lesson, not a longing. You don't hate her. You don't miss her. You simply see her clearly. And clarity is the end of emotional suffering. So if you're still carrying pain right now, understand this. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're in transition. You're shedding an old pattern, an old attachment, an old version of yourself that loved without limits, but lived without boundaries. The next version of you will still love deeply. But this time, you'll love with eyes open, with feet grounded, with a heart that knows when to stay and when to walk away without looking back. That's not emotional detachment. That's emotional mastery. And once you reach it, no one ever hurts you the same way again. There's one last truth you need to hear. And it's not comforting, but it is freeing. Not every woman who hurts you will ever admit it. Not every story gets a confession. Not every wound gets acknowledged by the person who caused it. And if you're waiting for that, you'll stay stuck longer than you need to. Because closure is not something someone gives you. It's something you decide you no longer need. At some point, you realize that understanding why she hurt you doesn't change that she did. And protecting your future matters more than dissecting your past. That's maturity. The final stage of handling a woman who hurt you isn't distance. It isn't indifference. It isn't even forgiveness. It's integration. You take the lesson without carrying the weight. You remember the signs without reopening the wound. You move forward without dragging the version of her that only existed in your head. And here's the quiet power in that. You stop attracting the same dynamic in a different body. Because patterns don't repeat when the person who tolerated them no longer exists. You've changed the rules. Now when someone pulls away, you don't chase. You observe. When someone disrespects you, you don't explain. You exit. When someone is inconsistent, you don't hope. You decide. Not emotionally, logically, calmly. That calm is earned. It came from nights you didn't think you'd get through. From moments you wanted to reach out, but didn't. From choosing dignity over momentary relief. And one day, without realizing when it happened, you'll notice something surprising. You feel lighter. Not because love no longer matters, but because you no longer confuse love with sacrifice of self. The right woman won't require you to shrink. She won't thrive on uncertainty. She won't test your worth by withholding care. And when you meet her, you won't feel anxious. You won't feel addicted. You won't feel like you're constantly proving something. You'll feel steady. And that's how you'll know you're healed. So if you're listening to this right now, still carrying the echo of her actions in your chest, remember this. She didn't break you. She revealed what needed strengthening. And you listened. This is Female Code Unlocked, where pain becomes perception and perception becomes power. If this spoke to you, stay with the channel. Because the more you understand the emotional game, the less you ever have to play it again.